Thank you, Joachim. Good evening from my part. I realize we are competing with almost again sunny weather outside, and in that sense, it's a true sign of passion to see you join us here tonight. I would kindly ask for my slides to come up. There we go. Those would be my slides. So first of all, thank you to distinguished speakers, to our dean, to Professor Henkel for organizing this event. And thank you, the audience, for joining us in what I think is a really important conversation. Allow me to sort of separate my talk into three topics. One being the most complex and ungrateful to discuss, which is what is TUM in Europe and what is Europe for TUM. I will just share a few snippets of information that I think might be of interest to you. Second, as I was preparing for this talk, I realized that this question of what is EU for me was a really interesting one, and I talked to a lot of dear friends and colleagues and understood that there's much to be discussed. So I'd like to share a few of those remarks. And then a final topic is really a selfish one. I am a big fan of TED Talks. Any big fans of TED Talks in the audience? Okay, I'm seeing some hands. So you might have seen that oftentimes the TED conference invites their guest speakers to make a wish. And I would like to copy and steal that format in making a wish for the EU week going forward. Okay, TUM in Europe and Europe in TUM. The internationalization data of TUM when it comes to Europe are pretty much evidencing that everything we do is in one way or another affected by Europe, starting from the regulatory framework, obviously, but more importantly, funding a lot of really exciting and important research, and funding sort of a lubricating exchange of science, research, and students as well. In that sense, I'm really, really proud to say that TUM is #1 in Germany when it comes to the Erasmus program. Erasmus audience here as well? Erasmus experiences, a few, okay. So you have probably all heard of Erasmus. It's a special dedicated funding from the EU to allow the exchange of students among universities. What does it mean to have 312 Erasmus partners? It means an incredible amount of paperwork on one hand, but at the same time, it really means incredible stories coming back our ways when it comes to students who have either been hosted by us here in Munich or indeed who have gone on to any of the number of partners and come back with impressions. So allow me to share a quote from one of them to maybe illustrate the point. A student has said, "Many people talk and make judgments about a country, although they've never been or visited. I'm particularly annoyed when things we hear in the media," and Professor Henkel just pointed out what the media can do. I get annoyed when things in the media are equated with all of the citizens of any country or the country as such. I think the country is a force that cannot be fathomed so quickly. To get to know the people, you need a certain amount of time to gain their confidence and trust. Following this exchange, I come back with many positive and surprising impressions of Germany, which have shaped me as a person very much. Of course, I also found many international students and friends, which I will surely visit in their hometown in the foreseeable future. So in that sense, obviously, I won't bore you with the numbers and impressive funding that we have collected. What I would bore you with, if you allow me, is that I really see Erasmus and other EU programs funding an interconnected web of emotions, of experiences, of understanding, of tolerance, of appreciation for one another. And in that sense, that investment cannot be counted in money. Sometimes these friendships result in more. So a recent study and evaluation of Erasmus found that we have more than 1 million Erasmus babies. We don't have a real record of how many of these are TUM babies, but we have heard also recently some exciting announcements, so there's definitely a generation of new and special people growing among us as we speak. Beyond teaching, allow me to share a few insights on research and innovation. There are so many programs that are funded by EU that it's really hard to mention. One that I'd highlight is fairly recent and also incredibly potent in scale. It is the EIT funding for the knowledge and innovation communities. And these fundings go on different topics. There was a kick for climate, there was one for energy, and there's also one for manufacturing coming up, etc. One that TUM is proud to have coordinated and taken leadership of, and one is related to food. I don't think I need to tell you the challenges that we're facing when it comes to food, when it comes to the transparency of what are you actually eating, to how it was made, where it was brought from, what does it do to your body. Every day you hear different news, what you should be eating, what you shouldn't be eating, what improves your concentration, etc. And in that sense, the mission of Food Kick is to counterbalance, on one hand, terrible trends when it comes to having more obese people today than hungry people in the world. It's something to think about. And also bringing basically food issues to forefront through innovation in more than 300 products and processes that will be improved, and more than 300 startups at the same time. So really a worthy and notable initiative that coordinates, I think, more than 50 partners across 13 countries. Okay, it's huge. And I think in that sense, even American scientists have basically recognized EU's power when it comes to facilitating and bringing into a collaboration sometimes very different parties, sometimes competitors, industry and academe alike. Another example is Eurotech. Eurotech is a strategic alliance of European technical universities that TUM has contributed to founding some years ago. We're talking about Technical University of Denmark, Eindhoven, EPFL in Switzerland, and TUM, of course. There's a number of things that this alliance is doing, but I think one important thing is that we have an office in Brussels, which helps us have a dialogue with all the important stakeholders in the European governance, and at the same time really permit the funding and influence of EU across all the activities that we do, from research and innovation through entrepreneurship and a voice in Brussels. And in that sense, I'm really excited to be teaching in one of the programs funded by EU for Eurotech, which is actually next Monday, and I have just acquired a guest speaker. Thank you very much. We are going to be bringing 20 entrepreneurs from these 4 respective universities. They are young, they are passionate, and they need our support in terms of the knowledge and the network, and this is precisely what we'll be providing them with going forward. So I think in that sense, what is EU for the universities, and what I think the universities also bring back to EU, is a creation of an entrepreneurial mindset. And I say intentionally mindset. Am I being buzzed to stop? No? Okay. I say intentionally a mindset and not counting just startups, because I think the number of problems that you see in the media, certainly, and that you see around you should be seen as opportunities. And this can happen in the political sector, this can happen in NGOs, this can happen in startups, of course, or in big multinational companies. So creation of this mindset is important for Europe going forward. So I told you about TUM in Europe and Europe in TUM. Second thing I'd like to talk to you about is the concept of identity. Looking at the fantastic program that you have ahead in this week, I realize that you'll have an important set of topics you'll be able to learn about. There's topics about the markets. Of course, today's speakers will talk about innovation from the EU perspective as well as from a startup perspective. There are talks about forests and managing natural resources. So a number of important topics, none of them, though, asking the question of, what is a European? What is it? And in that sense, as I started reflecting, having been born in Yugoslavia, or ex-Yugoslavia now, having gone through a war in Croatia, moving to the US, then moving to Spain, now ending up in Germany, I really started wondering, when did I first feel as a European? And oddly enough, I realized it was when I moved outside of Europe. So as an ex-Yugoslavian or a Croatian, EU, I mean, Croatia just became part of EU 4 years ago. So European Union was something you learned in textbooks and not something you lived. We waited at the borders, we had a different currency, we still have. I had to fill out numerous forms to be able to work both in Spain and in Germany. So EU was sort of a fuzzy concept in that sense. But the first time I felt European was in the States, because I just started living a different culture, different set of norms, different approach to work-life balance. I ate protein bars and drank smoothies for lunch. I worked days and nights. This is not something we typically do in Europe. We like to have a vacation or two. So in many ways, a lot of the values were sort of shaken, if you want, in meeting the dear colleagues and friends in the United States. And this was really the first time I had a question of, okay, European, what does it mean? As I talked to friends and colleagues in preparing for this event, I realized the interesting thing is that people don't think about it. It's not something that you really wake up in the morning and think about under a shower. And when you ask people, an incredible discussion entails. And depending on their roots, their circumstances, how much they traveled, etc., you have incredibly varying ways one thinks about their own identity, right? So being a researcher, I then went and looked at some more data. And there's a study called the European Barometer, and they ask a question about identity to a representative number of European citizens. And the question is the same from 1996 onwards, which for a researcher is very gratifying. And the data says, from 2004 until 2014, the percentage of the average European identifying themselves both as a European and their own nationality has risen from, I believe, 58% to 61%. 10 years. Are you impressed? You're impressed? I wasn't. But then, of course, when you dig deeper, you find what we've seen in Brexit. You find what we're seeing also in the US elections. And you're finding what I believe we see in universities, that when you look at young, educated people, the story is completely different. What does this mean for you? Identity is as much about who I am and as much as about what I do. So in that sense, if I can make a wish for you and for this event, it's that on this stage, it's you, not us. Because part of the concern why this event came about, I think, Joachim, correct me if I'm wrong, was a bit of a fear that people take EU for granted. And as I was thinking, I realized maybe it's not a bad thing that we take it for granted. Maybe it's a good thing that we take for granted that you can wake up one day in one city and work there and go to another and work there without waiting at the borders, without changing your currency, and while having incredible opportunities funded by EU. However, it's only a good thing as long as we're aware that we need to do something about it so that it continues to be so. So in that sense, for Professor Henkel, a piece of feedback, and for all of you, a call to action. Take action now. Talk to people about what it means to be European. Find opportunities to appreciate the differences and find commonalities. and use the opportunities that this university and these wonderful speakers have ahead of you. Thank you for your attention.